Hi, everybody. Welcome back. It's a rainy, cold day here in Armstrong Hall. I hope that you're all warm and cozy where you are when you're watching this, listening to this. So, today we are going to talk about religion and diversity. And, religion seems to be one of those things that people have a lot of interesting stories to talk about in terms of their workplace. It can also be an incredibly powerful identity for people in many different ways. And though we know what religion is, we have different relationships with our religion and how we see religion and how we see its power. And so what I want to spend time on today is talking about the different ways that religion impacts diversity and then certainly in the workplace and beyond. So again, I have a Word document where you can fill in some notes, and I want to start with the definition that your text provides for religion. So I have it on your sheet there. There are a lot of ways to look at this from an intergroup perspective, so let's go to what they say is religion. We regard religion as systems of beliefs that can be used to mobilize populations to more effectively engage in positioning in order to compete for resources. So the nature of these belief systems and individual members' identification with them has great implications for treatment of those within and outside of the religious group. When we say resources, we are talking about the respect, attention, money, services that society gives to groups, in this case to religious groups. So all of those things that we've been talking about throughout the semester, in the first couple weeks we talked about social identity theory and the different rankings of groups and how groups drive their own self-esteem from their group membership, all these sorts of things. Now we're looking at that in terms of religion. And so while of course there are spiritual components to this that we'll get into, please don't lose sight of that these are groups and they are going to desire resources in the same way that other groups do, even with potential for deep moral components coinciding with that group membership. Okay, so there are several ways that we can look at religion as influencing diversity. So the first thing is looking at religion just as a social identity. So under social identity theory, our in-group, out-group dynamics define who we accept, give resources to. And those are in-group members, and those whom we discredit, those whom we see as homogenous, and whom we will not grant resources to, are out-groups. For many people, even those who may not believe in all, many, or any of the things that religion teaches, this in-group, out-group designation is enough. It is enough to incite the behaviors I've just listed. Take, for instance, people who are not at all religious, may not believe in the teachings of their faith, care about them, may even be opposed to some of those teachings, or all those teachings, but they are less bothered. Let's take Christians in this case. Christians who fit that bill, and who are less bothered by Merry Christmas, even though that is that comes from religious background, than by Praise Allah. So I'm Christian, I don't believe, in this hypothetical scenario, I'm Christian, I don't believe in any of the teachings of Christianity. If someone says Merry Christmas to me, I'm fine with it. But if someone says Praise Allah, that's because I still have a part of me that is Christian, identifying with other Christians more so than non-Christians who have a strong passion for their faith. So your chapter spends a lot of time talking about this, even the Merry Christmas thing and related phenomena, which, I hope when you read that section you really look at it and self-evaluate a little bit too, how much does this resonate with me or why? And some of you, to be quite honest, are better than others at seeing your own biases and how it plays into your communication than others. So before just looking around at your coworkers or family members or people from other religions, look within yourself too. Okay, so this is perhaps the simplest way to think about religion and diversity, because we can see why people want their religion to have social capital, to have those powerful things, those resources, and to see their social group as a means of their own self-esteem, etc., because we've talked about social identity theory so often. But religion can be more complex than that. Many people see religion as, for number 2, a moral identity. Several theorists have evaluated the differences between morality or value-based identities as opposed to or in comparison to other purely social identities. So in other words, addressing when someone has moral convictions versus, oh, I'm Christian by title only, or because my parents are Christian, I was baptized as Christian, versus, oh, I embrace all of the morals, the values taught in my faith. Stetson Carter, as well as Stephen Hitling, describe morality and values as the core of ourselves. The things that we see as right or wrong, or more accurately, the things that we value over other things, the virtues we value over others, are so important to us that we react more strongly to these than to other identities that are simply based on an outward social categorization. Put differently, if you are a part of a religion and you believe wholeheartedly in all the things that religion's discourse values over other things, i.e. honesty over kindness, compassion over righteousness, then you will act in accordance with this in a way that is deeply meaningful to you. This can be a great thing for diversity. It could also be a bad thing. So let's start with the negative first so we can get to the positive, which I like to talk about more. So here's how it can be bad. If my religion values its supremacy over other faiths, that's something that I really uphold in my religious identity. If my religion values power and authority over compassion, or perhaps it values, and I value as being a part of it, a blind adherence to the religious text. These things can be problematic for intergroup dynamics. The values of the religion in and of themselves suggest that being a good group member is looking down at other humans, especially non-group members or those who are bad group members who don't follow the norms of the group. Well, that is going to be potentially harmful, even dangerous, because that's a strong driver of how I'm going to see other people and then how I'm going to respond to them. And the righteousness that I feel through my faith could lead me to be harmful to other people. Okay, so that's probably somewhat obvious. It can also be bad in that people's values are so important to them that they can trick themselves into thinking false things when they sense that their morality is being threatened. I'll say that again. Another reason why this strong moral identity within religion can be bad is that people's values are so important to them that they can trick themselves into thinking false things when they sense that their morality is being threatened. For instance, Efren has a really interesting article, a 2014 piece, where he found that people who were primed to think that they were to be perceived as racist, so they were made to think that the things that they're about to do could be looked upon as racist, and that attacks their morals because individuals don't want to be seen as racist. This is something that the participants did not see in themselves, did not welcome in themselves, did not think that they had racism. And it's important to their moral identity that they are not racist. That's probably many of you, and you've written about this. Okay, so those individuals, when they were primed to think about this, they looked back, they reflected on their own previous behaviors with less accuracy than those who had not been primed. So when they look back at things they had done, they actually changed how they looked at those behaviors. Why? Because they felt so threatened by this idea that they could be seen as immoral, as being racist, that they looked back at things they had done, and they inflated some of their helpful behaviors toward different races in particular, their giving behaviors. They looked back differently. Why? It's a defense mechanism, right? It's a defense mechanism to say, no, I am moral. I am moral. No one can question my morality. But now I'm going to look back differently. I'm going to change what's happened in my mind so that I can keep consistent with what I want to think about myself. You can see where that could be very dangerous. Okay, so those who were primed in this way not only had that inaccuracy issue in their own reflections, but they also began engaging in behaviors that actually made them appear more racist. So an example of this would be they said things like, "I'd never be a racist." Think about that statement. You can see where someone who's told that oh my gosh, your behaviors could be under fire. You could be seen as a racist. Why they would get so defensive, right? You can see that. But then to say something like, I'd never be a racist, it's kind of like when people say, I'm not racist, but, then they always say something racist. Or, I'm not sexist, but I think women should only be allowed to, blah, blah, blah. It's like, guess what? That's sexist. Whenever you say something like that, it always, the next thing that comes out is something racist, right? So what happens is people are primed to think that they could be seen as immoral. They could be seen as bigoted. And so they look back on things differently than how they actually behave. They paint themselves in a prettier light than how they actually appeared. And this nervousness, this anxiousness leads them to behave in ways that actually are like a self-fulfilling prophecy, because it makes them look the very thing they don't want to look. So we see here in Ephron's work that our moralities are so important to us, that we are so vulnerable through them, because it's so important that we be seen as moral in these ways that we describe to ourselves as important. That when threatened, we change. We change in ways that do more harm than good, probably. Okay, so we're so passionate about our morals because they mean so much to how we see ourselves that we overestimate how much we behave in accordance with those morals, and we're on edge and incredibly emotional. And we know that the more emotional we are, usually the worse things can go. In terms of intergroup context, right? More emotional, we're not thinking clearly. We're making more of these knee-jerk gut reactions. That doesn't tend to be really good for human behavior. So we've talked a great deal about how keeping emotions calm and getting time to know individuals, think empathically, etc., are all positive things when it comes to interacting with others. And you can see how, I'm sure, if we think our morals are being questioned, we can see unclearly, and that is just going to inflate the intergroup distinctions of us versus them problem. That's never good. Okay, so I've talked a bunch about the two big ways where your moral convictions and a strong moral identity within religion can be negative. So how is it good? Well, if your moral convictions are to be open, to question, and these are norms of your group, to be inclusive, to treat all humans in humane ways. And a lot of religions have this, right? And these are the norms of your group, the people within your group that you look to for advice, who are speaking the language of your religion and who you really identify with. If these are the norms of that group, if this is what's being communicated, then your morality can be incredibly useful to diversity. If your morality is one of valuing compassion over justice, for instance, or if you see justice as compassion, then your moral identity will likely lead you to be inclusive of others, even those who have different religious identities and even those who have different value systems. You know, one of the things I talk to my grad students here on campus a lot about is this, oh, I'm not this, I'm not that, I'm not prejudiced. But the minute we talk about a population that has a high level of negative attitudes or even hatred about an outgroup, some of their reactions is, oh, I don't like those people. And I'll say, oh my goodness, look at what you're doing. You're attacking all of who they are because of their value that's different from yours, and that can be very harmful, but they're more complex than that. So don't be prejudiced against people who are highly prejudiced, right? So in this way, the in-group identity is one of inclusion. So if our morality says to be good to all people, if that's something deeply rooted in our religious faith, even people who see the world differently, then this is a beautiful thing in terms of diversity. And so when you include others, you are affirming your identity in these religions, right? If you belong to a religion and your connection with that religion is, gosh, our religion is inclusion, it is embracing difference and growing and learning from each other, then you're affirming your identity, your social identity, and your religious and your moral identity by doing those things. And it sort of flips this out-group negativity bias on its head, because your in-group identity strengthens inclusion rather than exclusion. I'll say that again. When you value compassion, reaching out to people who are different, being open, honest with yourself, questioning faith, reaching out to other people across religious borders, because your in-group identity strengthens inclusion, you're not going to have those exclusive, negativity biases against outgroup members. So that is not only good, that is actually amazing. Okay, a quick word about values. We often use the word values to mean right or wrong, but that's much simpler than what social science would suggest. Despite notable exceptions, there are many virtues that many, if not most of us, deem important. I've mentioned a few of these: honesty, compassion, loyalty, kindness, integrity, charity, humility. But while we might agree that all of these are important, we don't always agree on which ones trump the others. This is what becomes very interesting. Often in life there are moral dilemmas, times when the morals we have and may all share and see as important are in conflict with each other. For instance, the choice of whether to be honest or to be kind is one that seems to make people stew, wonder, worry. So, when understanding human interaction, this is so crucial to remember, especially because it reminds us that we aren't so different in our morals. But these ranking systems might make for interesting intergroup scenarios in which your and my differing moral rankings could lead to intergroup rather than interpersonal dynamics. And this is when, as we know, can make us think we are worlds apart when really we're just a city or state away. Okay, a word about measuring various identities, religious, moral, or otherwise. At this point in the semester, we've talked about ourselves as in or out of groups. And so often we can ask people how much they like a particular group, so we can give them a feeling thermometer that does this quickly for attitudes. We can give an implicit association test to measure that stereotype activation, and these can easily measure these things for us. But what about when we're talking about all the identities within us? How do we measure that? In this week's activity, you're going to use a popular identity instrument, the identity pie, and write briefly about your thoughts on its ability to capture the complexity of people's identity. Note your thoughts on its ability to capture the complexity, and on your homework, note that the identity pie is designed so that you can allocate different percentages, so you have different sized pie pieces, to the varying parts of your identity. So as I often study and find in my own work and life, mothers tend to give their mother identity a large piece of their pie. So this might be at 30% of my pie, then wife might get 25, followed by professor, friend. You'll see that many of mine in this example are roles, but yours don't have to be. You might have pie pieces for your race, ethnicity, or your religion. The labels you pick for these are also very telling. For instance, selecting that you're a Methodist at 10% of your whole identity, or that you're spiritual at 10%. These are differences, right? This is just who you see yourself as in regard to the pieces of identity within you. Of course, this doesn't take into account the shifting salience of our identities. I didn't write woman on my identity pie, but if you bring up something sexist, that'd be an identity I'd think of. That's something we have discussed quite a bit, but that an identity pie just isn't going to capture. And of course, just because we don't put something on our pie doesn't mean that it doesn't drive our behavior. I won't put Caucasian on my list because that's not something that I think of as making up who I am. If you just ask me, who are you? But I'd be foolish to not think that this influences my communication. The identity pie also doesn't speak to the nature of the core of the pie, which we've talked about as a moral component. I want you to write the pieces of your identity pie and their percentages, then briefly describe what you like and don't like about this from a scholarly standpoint and, to a lesser extent, a personal standpoint of accurately showing the world who you are in regard to your identity. I really look forward to hearing about all of those and reading what you write for your assignment.